Welcome back to Balderdash Academy. We are here today with visiting professor and audio dramatist Fred Greenhalgh of Final Rune Productions. Fred is an audio writer, director, producer, and creator of The Dark Tome, which the third season will drop on Halloween. The Cleansed, The Mayan Crystal, and Of Fae and Fiends. He is passionate about bringing audio stories to life. His work includes Lock and Key and The X-Files for Audible, and Expeditionary Force Homefront, which is listed on the New York Times bestseller list. He's worked on set with David Duchovny, Gillian Anderson, Kate Mulgrew, Stephen King, and Zachary Quinto. If you are interested in the art of audio fiction, Fred runs Final Rune Academy, where he has a 5-week free online course called So You Want to Make Audio Fiction. Links to all of Fred's work and his academy are available in the description. Fred, welcome to Balderdash Academy.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
So, now you started in the University of Southern Maine, then you moved your education to the University of New Orleans for film, right? You've written an ebook about filmmaking without camera. So, how much did your education and experience with film influence the audio aesthetic of your work?
If I were to be honest, the time in New Orleans is foggy. No.
I think that's what everybody who goes to New Orleans says.
There was education that was outside the classroom involved.
Hard knock of life.
No, but back in those days, this was the early 2000s, and it was. I didn't really realize this before I moved down. I was in Maine and grew up, and it was cold, really cold, and I was like, I kind of want to get away from cold for a while, and it was like between Miami, New Orleans, and California, and I chose New Orleans, which was the right choice. But they were a lot of Hollywood movies were actually being shot down there, so I managed to score myself like a gig as dude holding the microphone 7, and I really liked that experience of being on a production set, coming from a fiction writing background, which is an extremely solitary craft, to like being with other people who like doing things. And I never had gotten into stage theater, and so that was my first experience with production. And long story short, I ended up back in Maine, and I don't know. It was the kinds of stories I wanted to tell weren't really possible with the kind of money, meaning none, that I had as a graduating college student. And so someone, Eric, actually, what the heck is Eric's last name? Turned me on to like these old time radio dramas. And I was like, these things are freaking brilliant. Like, why isn't anybody making them? Yes. And so it was like finally this like lightning bolt shot off that you could use this sound recording technology to tell a story. And my first story was set in New Orleans, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was already starting to think in sound. Like, to me, the French Quarter is the sound of clopping hooves, tourists barfing behind a bar somewhere, and beer bottles scattering down the road while someone plays jazz. And with those sound effects, you can create that image in someone's head without, the flying drone with the big sweeping shot and the crane and the whole, like, bought the place, closed the street down for the march of the blah, blah, blah. Like, 5 sound effects paints that picture on someone's imagination.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you find with what's going on right now that audiobooks and immersive audio entertainment is just stepping up? My listenership.
This is because I was gonna answer that. I thought you were going somewhere different with that question. One of the things that's really funny is that Hollywood has sort of discovered that this exists again, and I to the point where I've been part of this thing called Radio Drama Revival.
Yep.
I originally started it as a showcase show for this type of work, and now it's with a new host, and it's in its 13th year, and we've started a drinking game whenever someone quote invents audio fiction or audio movies or audio drama, or Podfi is the weekly one, and so it's like, take a shot whenever someone invents radio drama again, and finish your drink when someone comes up with the Netflix of podcasts. But that's just me being glib. Like, it is delightful because because so many of the visual forms of art are sadly shut down. I mean, it's horrific what's happening to arts and culture, but the shining part of it is that you can create this type of work asynchronously, remotely, and it's certainly harder. Before the call, we just talked about some of the shows we've worked on together, where we'd take actors out and shoot it like a movie, like record them on location. That's harder to do, but you can record, like, for example, Dark Tome Season 3, the 3 lead actors are New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and then an ensemble in Maine, and that is cool. And at first, as being like the sort of the field recorded, very much liking to work with actors in studio in a very visceral way of recording. Certainly, I'll eat my own words. Like you definitely look down my nose at like people who recorded people in their apartments and did, people have been doing remote recording since the internet's been around, and I haven't loved how that has come out. But now that I've fully embraced it, it is a way of creating really cool stories with a global talent pool, which is cool.
Absolutely. One of my very first experiences of listening to a play was listening to Prairie Home Companion with my parents growing up. It was like part of our Saturday night thing, and then sometimes Sunday afternoon. And I remember there's this one guy, and he plays Guy Noir, Private Eye, and he also plays this guy, but it's just the sounds of the environment. So that's like one of the very first things that's really sticking in my head. Of course, I've listened to plenty of things since then. What's the first thing you remember being like, that's...
I didn't know this. I didn't know what to call it, but I had the NPR Star Wars, which, if you're a child of the 80s, was a thing that was just in households, and it had... I think they had cassettes that had a follow-along book with some of the art and stuff, and I didn't know that to call that a radio drama, but it was, and I also think, going back to in the early '90s in a farmhouse in East Machias, we had a Peter and the Wolf record that had storytelling and music on it. So. Those types of products have existed, and at some point people forgot what to call them, and then that's why. I mean, it's really funny because everybody kind of like rediscovers and reinvents it, because it's like we've sort of lost our connection as a culture to a continuity. It's like it is kind of cool because it's like it's like you discovered that books existed in your 30s, and you're like, whoa, this is so cool. And of course you're not a press release that invented it, but you're like, no, it's been there. It's just we don't have that connection, but
but that's
I need to figure out how to get my hands on these Star Wars cassettes.
They're on YouTube. Someone
I have them.
highly illegal, but they're on YouTube somewhere.
I have the entire series
on YouTube.
I gotta borrow that.
So, and that Star Wars one in particular, there are scenes in the audio drama that do not exist in the movie because they were cut before.
But they re-released it with new scenes, right?
Completely. Yeah, completely.
Okay.
And all of the scenes are CG, so the voices aren't even real. They're all computer generated. So,
and Jar Jar Binks.
So, like, for me, but I mean, what I was saying before I interrupted myself, which happens, was
such a dick to yourself.
That abandonment of audio drama, audio comedy, the audio narrative was really only abandoned in the United States. Europe, Britain, BBC's had them continually. And if you take a look at, look at the classics for us, that you have Hitchhikers, to modern, you have like Cabin Pressure that just finished its run with Benedict Cumberbatch, which is absolutely hilarious. So what do you think it was dropped off in the United States where it was continued in Britain? Like, what do you think might be the mechanics behind that?
Oh, I mean, I have a whole lecture on that one. The short answer is that it has a lot to do with how media works in America. Essentially, the people who own the networks owned the equipment. So the reason that radio drama ever kind of existed in the first place was that they needed you to have a reason to buy a radio. So they needed to have something on the radio. So they created content. And at a certain point, people bought radios, and then they needed to still make content. And then they found that commercially sponsored ways was a way to monetize their content, just like podcasting. Very, very similar. And then there was basically a point where like a new fancy new shiny technology came along called television. And essentially the networks assassinated radio drama. They basically said, this is the new shiny object. You're going to port to this medium or you're going to not work anymore. And, some people like Orson Welles are better known for what they did in the visual medium, but they all started as radio artists, and others, some of the best people at the craft, just never found television, especially television at that era in terms of sophistication of storytelling, wasn't they could tell a bigger story on radio. So in America, it was an extremely deliberate, it happened as a result of very, very of market forces that still exist today. And, the way that Europe chose to develop media mass communication was a bit different. The sense of public, like commercial radio stations didn't exist in Britain, I think at least till the 70s, 80s, thereabouts. So, and I don't know when the BBC started exactly, but they've always had a much more significant buy-in and more robustly supported public system. And that is starting to change because of their own stuff. And yeah, it's interesting. I was, one of my last pre-COVID things was with a friend from the UK, Jack Bowman, we kind of started around the same era together. And so we both have we were comparing notes, the US versus the UK perspective, calling it the grass is always greener. Because the US people are like, y'all over there in the UK, you have this unbroken tradition and you have the BBC, and if only America had what you had, we would be doing so great. And the UK people say our institutions are stale. There are some brilliant people such as Dirk Maggs and John Dryden who really work within that system but are sort of roguishly upset it. But much of what is produced is sort of of a certain kind of piece. And you Americans are so innovative, and you have no expectations. You're doing crazier stuff with the medium than you are because you have that whatever Wild West mentality. And so it's ironic how there are pros and cons to the respective tradition or lack thereof.
Do you ever read something and think this would make an amazing audio story?
Oh yeah, it's
obituaries.
Healthy sometimes. Yes. Dramatically. Swallowed a candle whole.
Oh Lord. What is one thing that you wish that you could create, or are you more apt to just write your own?
I mean, that's where I'm at now. I mean, that's why I ever started, was because I was, a fiction writer and then maybe filmmaker. And then it was I can tell the stories in this new medium. So doing Lock and Key, that was certainly a unbelievably wonderful thing to do, and to inhabit that world for so long, and to have such buy-in from Joe Hill as well as Gabe Rodriguez on that, and the Audible team who, I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but to this day I'm I can't believe they kind of said yes, because we were we want to do this 13.5-hour epic thing recorded on location in a haunted house as one of the first big at bats for a multicast thing, and they were just they saw the vision and they went for it. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
So, I know as a playwright, we're often bound by the limitations of the reality of the production. There are just certain things you can't write in a play if you ever wanted to get produced. So, what limitations exist for you in audio?
Ooh,
the limit does not exist.
Yes. You obviously have your tool. Your toolkit is a different toolkit. You don't have the visual aspect, and my sort of my counterpoint to that point is that that is its greatest strength as well as its greatest weakness. But you have the human imagination to work with. So if you can effectively paint an image on someone's imagination, it's better than any visual image that you could construct with the 75 VFX writers. people, not writers, VFX people who make things go shiny, and like this scene where someone's jumping and all the steps are falling as they're jumping, and there's like cities are imploding in a goo. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tricky medium because like you don't have glitzy special effects to distract people. Like if the story doesn't hold water, it just becomes poo. The poo-ness of it becomes evident very quickly.
Tigger.
But you can also withhold information to great effect, and there's a quote like Stephen King, and I forget in which of his like nonfiction books about horror writing, says something about how much those 1950s era radio dramas scared the bleep out of him, and what in the way he talks about it is that like any movie, you like at some point there's the big reveal and you see the monster, and there's some amount of relief because he says instead of you open the door and you see a 7-foot tall monster, but in your imagination you thought it was a 10-foot tall monster, so you're like, whew, at least the monster is only 7 feet tall. And he says like in radio you never get the big reveal. Like if you can effectively conjure that monster, it's as big as your poor brain can possibly imagine it being. So I like that. I mean, and I don't quite mean to harp on horror, but that is kind of where a space that I tend to occupy. So it works really well for that because it's a medium where there's a long tradition of telling ghost stories around the campfire and scaring each other with the oral tradition.
And the visual that you can create in your own head through your own terrifying imagination based on the sounds that you're hearing is probably scarier than anything that somebody could come up with and put on a screen for you to look at. Like, I know that the things that I like imagine up are always more scary than what I see on a screen. And you have that beauty with radio, and that like you're putting the images in people's head, but they get to actually paint the details of it.
I mean,
that's very cool.
Just have silence and then just like creaking slow footsteps.
Yeah.
You don't need to do anything else, but you will scare the bejesus out of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I did this free online course that you mentioned earlier, Bob, and there was a showcase of student work. So the whole point of it was that students would actually go through and make a show over the course of those 5 weeks. And one of those pieces of student work I really enjoyed had no dialogue, and it was like a whole story
soundscape.
It was terrifying. It was essentially a murder mystery, but with no words. And I was
cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's a good idea. Speaking of terrifying, speaking of terrifying,
2020, huh?
How do you? Yeah, well, dumpster fire. How do you think? How do you feel? I mean, you've worked on the audio side of X-Files, translating that into audio entertainment. How do you think that? I'm big fan of the show, by the way. Big fan of the show. How do you think that translated from television to the audio entertainment? It could be scarier.
It was. No, it was tremendous fun. It was interesting because both when we did Lock and Key and then X-Files, both of those predated any film, any television stuff. And so this was before. It kind of ended up happening that the X-Files audio came out about the same time as the TV revival, and it was gratifying to see the fans who were like, we really like the audio. But what they liked is that they're in feel, it was much more like kind of the classic X-Files TV, so it had kind of those Monster of the Week episodes and whatnot. This isn't actually quite the answer to your question, but what I really enjoyed, there was a moment when we were working with Jillian, and her physical appearance that day did not look like Scully at all. Like her hair color was not red, and she was I don't know, it was she lives in London and it's like a totally different setup. But like listening to the monitors, you're like, I see you in my head, and you are exactly that person. And that part I really enjoyed. But yeah, I mean it was fun. There's like a kind of the way the audio is structured. It essentially feels like a season of the X-Files but in audio. And one of the ones has these aliens that kind of all polymorph, and there's like one who's like a shape. It's a little minor spoiler, but there's a shape-shifting one who changes identity a bunch of times, and like some of those transitions are scary as hell because you're like,
nice.
Hey, Fox Mulder. I'm actually not your friend.
I'm terrified right now.
The power of sound.
You mentioned some of the classic radio shows that inspired you, right? So for me, some of my favorites were like The Shadow or Gangbusters, Fibber McGee and Molly, different Molly. And then even thinking like later on, earlier before the show, we were talking about Stephen King's The Mist that came out in 89, 90, that audio. Even Jeff Wayne's crazy War of the Worlds disco like influenced me even as a writer, the way that I think of stories. So what are some of the ones that stand out for you?
I love, well, first off, obviously Orson Welles, but I like to go deeper. I mean, everybody's heard of War of the Worlds to the point where it's like such a trope that it's like almost like, please stop talking about that show. But some of his like lesser known work is really fantastic. And, you know, and just like the amount of space that artists like that were given to make their thing, because it was, you know, at the time it was well funded, and they and like entertainment today, the executives had no idea how to actually make anything. They just had to like throw money at people who seemed to be able to and hope for the best, and you got to see them do some really wacky stuff. And so yeah, that happened. And there I'm gonna forget, obviously Suspense, but there's another one, Inner Sanctum. I mean, the thing on the Forble board like holds up. Like on there's some I've still thought about. I did a project with a local theater company here in Maine, Mad Horse Theater, more than 10 years ago now, doing some old time radio adaptations on location. And one I've thought about revisiting is the thing on the Forble board, and sort of updating it for like the era of like fracking and tar sands or something. Because there's like it's not really an intentionally environmental message, but it's sort of in there, and there's this horror, and it's like, yeah, it holds up. Bradbury's Mars is Heaven holds up. I mean, yeah, if you like Ray Bradbury, like you should, and you don't know about old time radio, like you have this whole dimension to your favorite author that you don't even know exists, because he adored radio and was on it a lot. So yeah, there's a lot of really good spooky stories. In the CBC, I forget what exactly it's called. Oh, I have people who'll beat me up for forgetting. But the CBC had a really good horror series, I think in the 80s.
Golden Girls?
And Golden Girls, yes. Terrifying.
B. Arthur.
Yeah. Horror series.
Oh, man.
So to finish us off, who do you like to listen to now? What series do you gravitate towards listening to now?
There's a lot of great stuff coming out as podcasts. It's super exciting to see it's becoming a more inclusive medium. You know, frankly, it was like the dominated space of white engineering geeks earlier on, and that's become a more inclusive space. Is like, and especially like as podcasting has become a bigger thing. I think obviously Serial revealed to a lot of the world that could happen, but then there's like shows like Welcome to Night Vale that just put this kind of show on the map for a lot of people. And sorry, Marie, but to go back to something you said earlier, I was so grateful the day that someone said, "Oh, you make stuff sort of like Welcome to Night Vale instead of Garrison Keillor." It's like their most closest reference. I was like, it's not really like Garrison Keillor. Garrison Keillor
No,
would
it's
kill
not.
anybody. No. But and so there's some really cool stuff happening. You know, Moonface by James Kim came out over the last year. Passenger List, who's by one of my favorites, John Dryden, but he did this team up with Lauren Shippen writing and some others. And of course, I could not say my mentor and idol Dirk Maggs just released Sandman based on, you know, the Neil Gaiman, and it is masterfully done on every level. I mean, you look about that. They were talking about they've been trying to get that project made for 30 years, and it finally got made. And they both are expressing how they're glad it happened now, because audio is so much more sophisticated, and you know, the level of resources that they had and the kind of cast they could have versus 30 years ago is just does so much better justice to that series.
I have 5 hours left of it.
It is so good. It just delivers on every level, and that's what I love that particular partnership. Like Dirk is, you know, the best at the craft, and Neil is Neil, and it just hits every note, and you're like, this is what can be achieved in this medium. So that's kind of like, I'm hopeful, and I think just that existing has opened up doors for me, or just opened up people's imagination that that this can be a form of art and entertainment taken seriously as its own and not sort of like a lesser cousin to TV and film. Because I think that's definitely been, there's a certain amount of like, I don't know, Hollywood cynicism about it to some extent of like, oh, podcasts are sort of this lesser thing. But now I think podcasts and things you can make in sound are starting to actually be taken seriously as an art form of their own, which is super exciting.
Totally. People are addicted to podcasts. Loving them.
Yeah. And Gaiman led the charge with the full cast audio recording of The Graveyard Book.
Yeah.
Which, And when you want to talk about, I will listen to Neil Gaiman read the phone book if I have the opportunity. He's brilliant as a reader. He's one of my favorite authors. You've worked with my other favorite authors, so this is kind of cool, right? It's like 1 degree of separation. But
screw you, Kevin Bacon. Just kidding. I love you.
Stephen King, Joe Hill, and Neil Gaiman are my triumvirate. They're who I always gravitate towards, and maybe it's because growing up in New England, you know, Stephen King is a birthright. Joe has that, being a comic book guy. Heart-Shaped Box is brilliant. 20th Century Ghosts, Nosferatu. There's some Horns. There's some of my favorite novels. The Fireman was brilliant. I was in tears.
Yes.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, I've always wondered though, like how creating that, the whole production, how starting it and producing it, and like, what's your first step with that? Is it working on the script? Do you have an idea and then you go for the idea, or do you work backwards where somebody comes to you with an idea and then you build it? How does a collaboration work?
Yeah, I do a lot more pitching than I would like to have to do. That's the least fun part.
Yeah.
I mean, no, it's kind of fun. But yeah, I mean, I'll skip to the fun part. So on something like Lock and Key, right? Like, I like you. I love Joe Hill's work. And it was like, and like we heard that Audible was like interested in exploring things outside of audiobooks. And it was like the most bold, daring thing we could possibly dream to ask. And actually, we didn't quite ask what we did. Joe was at a reading in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and we sort of like, and we saw him, and he was like hilarious. We pulled this prank with a fake severed ear that my late friend and co-conspirator Bill Dufries came up with this prank of giving Joe Hill a severed ear and said and we gave him like a stack of CDs and said thanks for lending us an ear. We sort of pitched him this idea, and he was like, "Oh, that sounds cool. Yeah, of course. Just have your people talk to my people." But then we use that sort of like tiny little interaction to go to Audible, like, Joe Hill's really excited. We got to do this, and we kind of like just built that excitement. But then we did have a vision of it, and I think when you get a taste for sort of audio storytelling, whether it's an idea that pops into your own head or like something you think as an adaptation would work. I don't know, it just sort of, something ignites inside of you, and it starts coalescing, and you definitely start, like for me on the comics projects I've worked on, and it is sometimes hard because it kind of distracts from like enjoying the graphic novel as a graphic novel experience when I'm starting to like imagine like, would this work? And would this work? Sorry, just read the damn book. But like it does start to happen that way, and sort of this producer brain comes on, and you can sort of like start hearing the images, maybe I did have psychedelics or something at some point, but there's some like, whatever miswire that starts happening. And then you kind of go from there. And at some point you do need a script, but it kind of starts from being able to kind of, just visualize how something will sound. And you're watching a movie. Like I have a friend who's a, film director, and he says he sees the movie in his head, and he's just trying to like use the technology to make it. And so it's the same thing with audio. The images are different images, but it's essentially the same thing. You're just, and then, you need a script, these other things, you need actors to inhabit your world, all that, but it kind of comes from some spark of flame that gives you this make-believe land that you can visualize. It's
the desire to tell stories.
So basically, you just get to be a kid all the time.
It's fun. My daughter's 8, and her birthday this year got her a small field recorder, and she's been recording the stories, Mr. Boom Boom, and the broomstick lady. Dude, don't get me started with the broomstick lady. She is freaking creepy. And there's also this clown on our property.
These are the characters that his 7-year-old daughter,
Correct.
7-year-old daughter has created.
Yes, the broomstick lady and the crazy clown and Mr. Boom Boom, and Mr. Boom Boom will like lock you in the
It's
basement
on
if you
SoundCloud.
don't.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I don't know how.
And Molly, it's like she's your girl's age.
If you, I don't think we need
Yeah.
a paternity test. It's clear.
She's taking after her daddy's footsteps, right, in horror.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
join us as we return for our Steam Pop quiz and Lie again, only on Balderdash Academy. Go Dashers!
Whoop, whoop.
For complete episodes and more, visit us at balderdashacademy.com.
If you can't go to a party hosted by a cosmetologist, then head to the mountains to have a beer in a blizzard. Come on, sing it with me. Oh, what fun it is to have in a one-beard open gondola, and other thoughts maybe don't. But do watch the next part of episode 12 on Balderdash Academy. It'll all make sense.
Thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. You can find us on your favorite podcast service as Balderdash Academy. Go Dashers!